This is the DreamItAlive show. I'm your host, Ash Kumra, co-founder of DreamItAlive.com. DreamItAlive.com is a global community guiding you to create your dream life with visualization tools, dream boards, and personal development content. Today's guest is an insanely successful talk show host and a best-selling author, Srini Rao. He is the host and founder of the Unmistakable creative podcast show. So guys, this show is a must listen for anyone out there who has any ounce of juice of creativity in them. He has interviewed over 400 guests. He's interviewed individuals like Seth Godin, Tim Ferriss, and most recently Glenn Beck, which we're going to get into in a little bit. And he's also the author of, among many books, but this one really was near and dear to my heart, which is one of the reasons why I've always wanted to have him on the show, which is The Art of Being Unmistakable, a collection of essays about making a dent in the universe. Wall Street Journal and Amazon seem to endorse this book as well because he's a bestseller on both those lists. But more importantly, Srini is one of the things I like about him is that he's just focused on his dreams and his vision. And at any cost, he'll pivot his way to find it. He will always look for the meaning of life every day to try to make the today better than the next day. And just his story on how he got to where he is and where he's taking his company, Unmistakable Media, and how he's able to work and learn from such notable people, like I mentioned, is quite a great conversation. So without further ado, let's get Srini on the line. So Srini, how you doing, man?
Hey, Ash, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, no problem, man. So, for people who don't know who you are, how did you get to where you are right now? Give us the nutshell life story.
Okay. Well, it's funny. Somebody had asked me about this, and I feel like I always tell the same stories. I want to take this back much, much further than I normally do. As far back as childhood, I mean, I guess the thing that I've always had is this desire to create and make things. And that started as early as about 7th grade in a math class of all places, where when the teacher assigned all these sort of logic and mystery puzzles, instead of doing the logic and mystery puzzle, I took the plot line of the logic and mystery puzzle, turned the people in my class into characters, and made a video about them and showed it to the class. So obviously I didn't do the assignment. Clearly I've had a problem following instructions since I was 13 years old. But there's also this entrepreneurial aspect of things that I guess has always been there. When I was in 8th grade, they opened up Sam's Club in our hometown in Texas, and I went there with my dad, and my first thought, I saw all the candy that they had that you could sell in bulk, and they had these sour gumballs, and I thought, you know what, those are 10 cents, the box is $7. I told my dad, I said, hey, if you buy that for me, I'll come back with cash tomorrow for it, with more than what it's going to cost. Yeah, I mean, it's $7, so he didn't really think much of it. And the next day I went to school with a brown paper bag, and I started selling these gumballs to anybody for 10 cents. And by lunchtime, I had people walking up to me, people who would never talked to me before. I wasn't one of the popular cool kids. And so I was taking orders for the next day, and I came back with a Ziploc bag full of money. And my dad was stunned, and so we went back to Sam's Club. We stocked up on more inventory. Friends of mine said, okay, you need to expand. So, I brought on 2 other friends, one to deal with all the popular kids, one to deal with all the jocks. And of course, because I was in all the smart classes, I dealt with all the geeks. And so we started selling these gumballs. And of course, like anybody who was in 8th grade, I didn't think very much about the consequences of my actions. And I got caught by the choir teacher, who said, you're not allowed to do that. And fortunately, her nephew was one of my best friends, so she kind of let me slide, but that was kind of the end of it. My parents kiboshed that whole idea. So this entrepreneurial spark really goes far back. And then, of course, there's an element of a commitment to a craft or an art. I was in band in high school, and I played the tuba for 13 years. And the reason I bring all of these things up is because I feel like they're actually very relevant to what has led me to today. Is there was always this sense of wanting to make things, having some desire to be entrepreneurial, and also having an insane amount of interest in creativity and the arts. And so all those blend together, obviously, to lead to what most people know today as the unmistakable creative. But in a lot of ways, I kind of lost my way post-college because I did what most people do post-college. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I went and got jobs at companies. I tried to climb the ladder. I tried to have a steady job with a paycheck, and it all kind of blew up in my face in April 2009 when I graduated from business school with no job offers, no money, and nothing else. So, I think when you hit rock bottom moments in your life, it's actually a fantastic chance to reevaluate what's really important to you. And I figured if I was going to rebuild from nothing, I should probably rebuild something that I actually want to live and rebuild a life that was very different from the one I was living. So that led to, dabbling with a lot of content creation, blogging, and bit by bit, every step sort of opened the door to the next one. First, it was a blog. Then there was a weekly interview series called Interviews with Up-and-Coming Bloggers. That was spun out into a separate site called Blogcast FM, where you've been a guest. And as a byproduct of that, we started, I just did a lot of writing because I was learning from so many creative people. And then the writing eventually led to The Art of Being Unmistakable, as you mentioned, which was self-published, became a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And one of the things we realized, and we can talk in more depth about this, is that Blogcast FM really didn't make sense as a name, given that we weren't just interviewing bloggers, but people from all walks of life were really coming to the show. And Blogcast FM didn't really have a brand identity. So we said, what is the ethos of what we do? And it's this idea of unmistakable. And so we said, okay, let's build the brand around this whole concept of unmistakable. And so Unmistakable Creative was born. In addition to that, we expanded into live events. We did our first 2-day in-person event called the Instigator Experience. And, applications for this year will be opening up on December 15th. And we can talk more about that as well. So what all of that has led to is I guess in a very simple way, I plugged the microphone into a laptop and I started a media company.
That's awesome. And yes, there are some questions I'm going to ask you about, some of the things you mentioned. But one of the things I'm really fascinated about you is that you've talked about on your Facebook page and even in your book about some of the rituals and habits you have. And I feel that part of the DNA to your success is that you've really been consistent in certain habits and rituals. What are those habits and rituals you do?
Yeah, it's funny because even I struggle with the very habits and rituals that I preach, right? One of them is writing 1,000 words a day, no matter what. And I've broken that at certain points because of just things that I was going through personally. And, I'm back into that ritual and rhythm, but it's taking time, And I guess here's actually an interesting analogy about that is, yesterday I went to a yoga class for the first time in 5 days. And I'd been going really consistently, and I was getting better and better and better, and the workout was seeming less and less intense. I could do all the poses, and yesterday I was really struggling, unlike I'd struggled, before, and I realized why. It's because I'd been out of, practice for 5 days, and it's kind of like a muscle, right? Like muscles atrophy, and so really, there's probably a couple of them. One is that, I consistently have written. I make a pattern so I'll walk you through my morning ritual. I wake up. I fill in this gratitude journal called the 5-Minute Journal. I read verses from something like the Tao Te Ching just because I want to get myself grounded. I'll do 10 minutes of meditation. And then I spend time reading writers who are really good or things that are inspiring because I feel that sort of just lights a spark. And then I'll write in my journal for anywhere between half an hour to 45 minutes, just kind of whatever comes to mind. That is inspired by the reading. I'll open the computer. I don't really turn the computer on before 8 o'clock in the morning. I think that turning on your computer is actually one of the worst possible ways to start the day. But in addition to that, I think that what has enabled Unmistakable Creative to get to where it's at right now is consistency, like you said. We've been at this for 5 years, and I still think it's a work in progress. It's not done, and I don't know that you're ever done. I think the idea that you get to some point where you're done and you get to sit back is a bit ridiculous. And, we often will become victims of our own success when we do that, and I only know this because I've experienced it firsthand. So you're always looking at, okay, I think really it's consistency, curiosity, depth, and longevity. Add all those together, and whatever that looks like for you, your habits basically are built from those sort of 4 pillars, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Well, here's a little devil's advocate. How do you deal with situations where you might be, in that mode every day accomplishing stuff, but you're not actually getting results? Like, how do you, or what someone in society would call failing or not making it? Like, have you ever dealt with that, and how do you overcome that?
Well, yeah. If you think about it, I didn't really get any results until year 4. And I think that it's interesting. I call it invisible progress. Often when we're making progress, we can't see it because the thing is like what I've seen. One of the funniest things I saw online was a podcaster who said, he's like, I don't get this. I've recorded 4 episodes and this seems like a waste of time. Nobody's listening. And anybody who's been at this for 5 or 6 years, that was a good laugh. It was like, really, 4 episodes? Talk to us when you've recorded 400 or 200. That's a tough question to answer. Part of it, I think, is that on some level, anybody who does stuff like this, they just believe inherently that something big will come from it, and you just kind of, I think you start with that belief. Like if you have that right from the get-go, and I would say that's the one thing that kept me going, is that I always felt something big would come from it, even when there were no results. And the other thing is I was enjoying what I was doing, because the thing is it's really easy to go look at what somebody else does and it looks really glamorous and phenomenal, and you think, okay, I want to do that. But most people don't want to actually they don't want the grind, they just want the glamour. And the grind is actually the part that you have to be willing to tolerate. Julian Smith, when I asked him, how do you do the best work of your life? He said, with a tremendous amount of suffering and your back against the wall. And I think that we really, especially in the world today, I think we can easily project images, or people can project something on us that isn't entirely true. And I think that you can say, okay, well, that person is rich and famous, and then you go look at the reality of their life, and it's not anywhere near what it appears to be. It's not like problems go away or any of that, but as far as when you're not getting results, part of it is learning to enjoy the process of doing what you're doing. So if that's the case, you should pick something you actually enjoy, because there's a possibility that there may not be any results. And then, of course, you have to be okay with the fact that none of this comes with any guarantees. It's all incredibly uncertain. It could blow up tomorrow. We don't know, what's going to happen. I mean, we could get to the end of the year and realize, wow, we've spent 5 or 6 years, and you know what? I think it's time. Even as late as mid this year, like early summer this year, I was really beginning to have a lot of self-doubt as to whether we could push to the next level, and whether I was like, wow, maybe it's time to consider a day job. And that's hard, especially when you put in so much work to something like this. So I think it really is it's grit more than anything else that allows you to get through those periods when you're not getting results.
One more kind of question on this whole journey of yourself and how you stay focused on being successful. You said, one of the things about becoming, you work on this so that hopefully something big can happen. I mean, what's your definition of big? What does big mean?
That's a good question, and I think, well, big means something different to everybody,
yep.
Right? It's a fitting question, because this morning I was reading a book called The Accidental Creative, and it said, how you define greatness will define you. And I thought, that's by Todd Henry, and I thought, wow, that's really profound. The thing is, I think we often think big means, special, getting on those lists that you mentioned, having thousands of people, but I kind of look at this through a very different lens, or at least I try to, and the balance of maintaining this is what's really hard, because the more successful you become, the harder it becomes not to have some level of investment in those accolades. But I wrote something on Medium where I talked about the limitless power of making art that touches people's hearts, right? And to me, big is doing work that doesn't alter my life, but in some way or another significantly alters the outcome of the lives of people who have been touched by my work. And, to some degree you could say I've accomplished that. But then beyond that, I think if for me, big is a mission and a purpose that you can spend a lifetime on. Okay.
I think that answer kind of sums up what you think big is, and it sums up kind of the authenticity that you project in your interviews and your book and all the stuff you do. I love that answer. That's awesome. I want to now dive into some of the big things that you've actually done, whether you like it or not. Is how the hell did you get on the Glenn Beck show? That's amazing.
Well, that was, I think a stroke of luck. You could say luck. I mean, there's definitely serendipity involved. I mean, I've been writing for 5 years at that point. So, the book came out. I self-published it just because nobody was willing to give me a book deal. And I just, I don't know that I had what it took to get my foot in the door with a publisher, partially because of the way I work and because of how unstructured I am. And publishers require just, a bit of rigidity in their process. And I couldn't do it. I actually felt very constrained by that. So I self-published this book, but I knew enough about book publishing because of all the authors I'd interviewed, and I was able to get the book up in the ranks to a certain level within the entrepreneurship category. And as bizarre as it sounds, Glenn found it browsing Amazon when he was looking for something else, and the cover appealed to him, and one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, I'm on the Glenn Beck show.
Okay. Wow. What did you learn? What have you learned from him? I mean, I knew you have had a few conversations. He's even been on your show now. Like, he's so uber successful, and he seems very grounded, and he seems very stubborn about doing things his way, which is awesome. What have you learned from him?
Boy, a lot of different things, really. I would say one of the biggest things I've learned from him is that you really, when you have a stage of that size or of some level of significance, you'll say things will piss people off. And the funny thing is, if you were lingering in obscurity, none of those things would matter to anybody. So that's a big one. And the other thing is that it's really, really easy for your ego to get involved in all of this and let it. It's easy to let it get to your head. I actually had this sense, after Instigator experience in April of last year, where I said, somebody had asked me if I had ever had an "I've made it" moment, and I thought for a little bit. I think I've made it. Like, I'm here. I've arrived, and things are going to be just phenomenal. And because the year that I had from November until about May of this year was like nothing in my life could go wrong. Everything I ever wanted was perfect. And then I experienced a pretty significant series of personal and business challenges. So realizing that your ego can become a part of this and making sure that you separate those two things is critical. Probably the most amazing thing that he told me when we last spoke, and I think this is actually mentioned in the interview, is that if you don't know what success looks like for you, it's very easy to blow right past it, and most people do. And of course, you're constantly redefining that, but it can become sort of a bottomless pit if you're not careful.
Okay, that's amazing. I'm kind of curious. We have actually a couple questions from some callers right now, and just curious to just throw some of these at you because there's some really good questions. This is from Diane. Hey, Srini, I have a question for you about your rituals. I loved what you and Ash were talking about. You said you do meditation. Could you, for me, who's not really been exposed to meditation nor have an understanding of Eastern philosophies, what is the simplest way to get into for meditation?
Yeah, for somebody like me who has like severe attention deficit disorder and can't concentrate, I found an app called Calm, and I realized the thing that worked really well is that you can do it in 5 and 10 minute sessions. So I just turn it on in the morning and I just sit down and start, and that helps. I mean, I think that the idea that meditation is this thing where your mind just goes silent is a bit ridiculous. I thought that's what it was too, but I've had the fortune to talk with monks and people who've done a lot of studies around mindfulness. And I think part of it is just taking that time to pause because we do live in this like hyper-connected world. I mean, I'm realizing right now as I'm talking to you, I have 3 windows on a browser open, nothing going on in any of them, and there's no reason for them to be open. But that's how most people live. So I think part of it is just taking a little bit of time to just silence the mind and just pause in general. And that to me is a starting point. Okay,
very cool. This is from Joe, and Joe said, hey, Srini, I'm actually a big fan of your show. I'm so glad Ash decided to do this interview with you. I'm kind of curious, how do you determine what kind of book to write, and describe the process that you did to create this Art of Being Unmistakable?
Boy, well, the thing with Art of Being Unmistakable is it was largely accidental. I didn't even know I was writing The Art of Being Unmistakable when I was writing it. I was just writing these Facebook updates. And so this is something that I think a lot of writers struggle with. They think they have to know exactly what they're writing before they start. And I always say that books reveal themselves to writers who write a lot. So really, as far as what kind of book, I kind of saw that there was a through line or a thread between everything that I was writing. I said, okay, truth be told, it was an experiment. It was, let's see how this works. And, there's a book that everybody should read called Little Bets by a guy named Peter Sims, which is all about the process of innovation and creativity and using sort of small, low-risk things that give you feedback very quickly. And that's what each one of those Facebook updates was. I mean, if I actually just wrote the book and threw it together, I wouldn't have had a test for resonance of the material. So what I'll do often is I'll look at, something that might have resonated, and then I'll kind of say, okay, well, where else could I go with this? And just exploring threads that resonate really is probably the best way to describe that.
Okay, very cool. Well, this is from Nicole, and Nicole has saying, hey, Srini, I was just kind of curious, what is the next thing that you want to do for Unmistakable Media?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, with our crowdfunding campaign on Patreon, you've seen some of what we want to do. One is really to get a YouTube channel launched where we will be doing animated shorts of the best sound bites from our interviews. Visual art has always interested me. I mean, that's a big part of why Unmistakable Creative is the way it is as a brand. And the next sort of iteration of that is, okay, we've played with audio, we've played with visual art. Now, what can we do in video? And obviously that's like, well, let's mix, visual art and audio together to create video. I've had a tremendous interest in film and video for a long time, but I didn't want to do it in a way that was just kind of cheesy and crappy. And also, I knew that I didn't have the talent to do it. I could come up with the ideas, but it was going to require a lot of work from other people. And I mean, as far as sort of the bigger, down the road, long-term picture, I mean, my dream, I would say if Unmistakable Media really is at the level where we're doing things of enough significance, we're generating the kind of revenue I want to generate, the next exploration will be documentary film. Nothing would be more interesting to me than to go work on the idea of a documentary film with somebody like, for example, Joe Loya, who robbed 30 banks. I mean, it's been really cool to tell people stories through this format of audio and podcasts and interviews, but I can't help but wonder what would happen if we took some of these people and we started making documentaries on some of these people and really kind of exploring them. But in the first sort of attempt at that, I wrote a post on a Medium called The Voice That Whispers Inside, and my first thought on that was, wow, I'm like, this could be a very interesting film. So I've been talking to my friend Matt Monroe about how we might do a short film with something like that, like a 2-minute thing, because again, that would be my first sort of little bet as to, can we make films that are inspiring? Can we do videos that inspire people? And again, like, what's the commercial intent of that? I'm not sure. I really have no idea if it has a commercial intent, but that's, if I could say, under our umbrella, what I'd love nothing more to see is obviously the podcast being sort of the bread and butter. You never mess with the core. And getting into animation, which is exciting. Obviously events, publishing. And publishing is interesting because, what the hell is publishing these days? It's still undefined. I mean, the definition of a book is rapidly changing. So what does a book mean, and what is the next sort of iteration of book going to look like? And so I'm thinking about that quite a bit. And then, of course, so all those sort of fitting under this umbrella of Unmistakable Media. So really, I mean, if you think about it, the core of what we do is create media and tell stories that ultimately move humanity and society towards better outcomes and hopefully optimize human performance to get people to levels of achievement in their lives that they've never gotten before. And, maybe more clever way to sum that up is creating media that's soul food instead of junk food.
I love that. Well, it's kind of coincidental or serendipitous that you brought up the whole what is publishing, because the final question is from Allie, and she wanted to know, I'm thinking of writing my first book. What is your thoughts on self-publishing versus going out for publishing? Like, what are the pros and cons of both?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because they had this conversation at an event I was at recently. Here's the thing with mainstream publishing is, at the end of the day, it's still a credibility builder, because we're still kind of in this hazy middle ground where self-publishing still doesn't have the respect of, say, somebody who has their book on the shelf at Barnes & Noble, yet there's probably people who have self-published. And I can tell you for a fact, because I know books, there's a good chance that I have sold way more copies of my book than a person who has a traditionally published book. So I think you got to think about what's the ultimate aim of the book. I wanted to write a book. I didn't write Art of Being Unmistakable so it would lead to all these things. I wrote it because I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to put it out into the world. Now, if you're thinking from a perspective of, professional, speaking, platform building, all that, or sort of credibility building, then a mainstream book matters. It does open a lot of doors. You have a team behind you. Effectively, Danielle Laporte had a good way of putting it. If you go with a publisher, then you get to stay in the business of writing. But if you self-publish, you are now in the business of publishing as well as writing, which means you have to have the resources to hire editors, you have to have the resources to hire cover designers, you have to have all that. So what I would say is if you're going to self-publish, act as if you're working with a publisher.
Okay, very cool. Well, before we end, I just wanted to ask you one last question. What excites you about life right now? I mean, you seem to have done a lot of things. I applaud you for your 5-year journey. I applaud you for the great things you've done in helping a lot of people and inspiring people. What are the things that really excite you? Forget business, forget Unmistakable Media. Like, what in life, what are some big trends or things in society that you're just like, you know what, life's good. I'm excited for what's to come.
Well, I think that what's exciting to me is I think we're still at the very beginning of all of this. While the world is noisier than it's ever been before, and the level of what you produce has to be better than it's ever been before, I think that as far as life goes, I think we haven't seen, this is like the tip of the iceberg. I think that what excites me is that we're finally listening to this conversation about education and saying yes, it's screwed up. We need to do something about this. That's a personal thing that's very important to me. And then, I think that as a society, we're getting to this point where we're realizing that doing work that is meaningful is very, very important, I think, for our overall health and happiness. And that's the way it goes. I mean, even if you don't get to do it as a job, I think it's really important that you spent part of your life, part of your day-to-day life, doing something that brings deep meaning to it.
Okay, cool, man. Well, any last initiatives you want to share with our audience before we end the interview?
Well, yeah, applications for the Instigator Experience are going to open up. We've set a date. It'll be December 15th, and we'll be unveiling all the speakers very soon. So if you're not on the pre-launch list, the thing with Instigator is there are only 60 spots. It is application only, and last year we got about 130 applications for 60 spots, and I have a feeling it's going to be more this year.
Okay, very awesome. Well, Srini, on that note, thank you for continuing to make the world be a better place, and I'm looking forward to seeing your next endeavor.
Yeah, thanks for having me.